When I walked across that stage, the lights felt hotter than they should have. My hands shook against the fabric of the gown, but I told myself it was pride, not nerves. I had worked for this moment, 5 years of classes, late nights, and stolen hours when everyone else was asleep. The announcer's voice carried my name, crisp and official, and the applause rose like a wave. But when I lifted my eyes to the row where my family should have been, I found nothing but empty seats staring back at me. 5 chairs, marked with blue tape and my own careful handwriting, sat untouched. I had imagined my husband's steady nod, my son shifting awkwardly in his collared shirt, my daughter clapping with wild enthusiasm, my parents smiling like the day finally belonged to me. Instead, there was absence so sharp, it felt physical. I searched for them anyway, as if loyalty might appear late, but I already knew where they were. The photos had begun to trickle in hours earlier. Sunlit grills, paper plates stacked high. My brother Brandon at the center with smoke curling behind him. While I stood alone in a sea of caps, my family had chosen ribs and laughter over me. Long before that stage, I had trained myself to shrink. Apologies became my first language, spoken even when no one asked. I apologized for the alarm clock that rang too early, for the blender Evan needed for smoothies, for Sadie's recital rehearsals that collided with my deadlines. I even apologized for my own heartbeat when the house was too quiet. Carrying other people's comfort became my duty, and I wore it like a tote bag stuffed so heavy it left marks on my shoulders. At Franklin Financial, my boss called me reliable, his favorite word for people who do the invisible work. I stayed late, covered for others, drew diagrams no one else wanted to bother with. He said a master's degree could change everything. So I went back to school at night. But even that choice, I framed as if it were a favor. I told Daniel it was just a season. I told the kids almost there because it sounded softer than not yet. Meanwhile, Brandon, my brother, collected the spotlight with ease. My parents praised his every purchase, every party, every upgrade to his grill. My sister Kelsey learned to tilt conversations, so I always sounded difficult without her ever saying the word. In their world, Brandon's ribs mattered more than my lectures, his boat more than my textbooks. And I nodded, and I said yes. And I whispered sorry to the air because it was easier than asking to be seen. When I finally told them the date, I expected at least one spark of excitement. Instead, silence stretched for a beat too long. My mom scribbled a detail on her notepad, then asked how long the ceremony would run, as though endurance was the problem. My dad wondered if the kids would be restless. And before my words even settled, Brandon announced his barbecue same weekend, same hour. Same gravitational pull that always redirected the family orbit. A grill magnet arrived in the mail soon after. Glossy and proud, Daniel placed it on the fridge without hesitation. Right beside it, I taped the commencement ticket. It's navy ink, steady and official. Every morning, the magnet and the ticket greeted me like rival invitations. One promised smoke and laughter. The other asked for patience and pride. Kelsey began sending cheerful updates about Brandon's menu, chairs, and games for the kids. She labeled me flexible in the thread, as though my milestone were just another variable to manage. Daniel said maybe we could do both? Split the day, squeeze in speeches before heading to Brandon's. I stared at him, wondering how a once-in-a-lifetime moment could be negotiated down to a time slot between coolers and folding tables. But I stayed. Quiet, because quiet kept the room peaceful. Or so I told myself. I pressed the ticket flatter against the fridge, straightened the tape, and whispered a promise I hadn't yet learned how to keep. This time, I will not disappear. The morning of commencement, I dressed slowly, careful with each pin and zipper, as if ritual could hold me steady. The navy dress hung exactly as I'd imagined it would when I first bought it, simple, strong, and mine. Sadie twirled in the doorway, telling me I looked like a painting. Daniel smiled politely, then went back to scrolling through his phone. On the counter sat a garment bag, and, beside it, the cooler already packed with juice boxes, folded towels, and sunscreen. My heart dipped. Even before I had walked the stage, the day had been written without me. Still, I held my silence, drove us to campus, and straightened Sadie's cardigan in the lobby. We'll figure it out, Daniel whispered, his hand hovering near his watch as if time itself would make the choice for him. The usher pointed us toward row C, section 12, and I turned to find Nora, my colleague, waving with flowers in her hands. She hugged me tight, whispered, "You did it," and settled near the aisle. Daniel offered to hold her bouquet, his eyes sliding anywhere but mine. Then the music began. Caps shifted. The line moved forward. I scanned the seats one last time. Row C glared back at me, five's empty chairs glowing under auditorium lights. No husband, no children, no parents. Just space where pride should have lived. My throat burned, but my feet kept pace. I had rehearsed this walk too many times to stumble now. After the ceremony, my phone lit up with a flood of missed calls. Daniel's name filled the screen 45 times over. When I finally answered, his voice was sharp with panic. Even had fallen from a slide at Brandon's barbecue. His arm bent wrong. They were already at the hospital. I gripped the steering wheel, diploma case pressing against my knee, and drove straight there. The emergency room smelled of bleach and cold air. Behind the curtain, my son sat pale but brave, his arm wrapped in a temporary splint. Sadie clutched a cup of ice, and there they all were, my parents, flanking the bed. Brandon leaning against the wall with a folded brochure, Kelsey scrolling as though logistics could fix a fracture. When Evan spotted me, his shoulders finally dropped. "You came," he whispered, and my chest ached at the relief in his voice. Daniel looked at me then, crushed and angry all at once. "I called you," he said. I told him the truth. I had turned my phone off because the university asked us to be present in the moment. The first thing I did after walking off stage was come here. Linda said the speeches were long, sometimes too hard for children. Brandon added that accidents happen, kids show off. Their words floated like excuses, thin and hollow. I looked at Evan's small, trembling hand and then at the faces around him. "This isn't about logistics," I said, evenly. "This is about respect, and today, you chose ribs over me." The room went still after my words. Daniel tried to reach for my hand, then stopped halfway, his fingers curling back like he'd touched a flame. My mother pressed her necklace, saying they'd only meant to keep things simple. My father shifted, muttering that safety had to come first after the fall. Brandon avoided my eyes. Kelsey finally glanced up from her phone, cheeks flushed, and murmured something about keeping the peace. I stood taller, the diploma case still heavy in my bag. "Peace without respect," I said, "is just silence that costs me my voice." My tone was calm, measured, the way you read rules out loud. I laid them down one by one. Nobody commits our children to plans without my consent. Nobody calls absence logistics again. Nobody erases me while expecting applause. Daniel swallowed hard, then nodded slowly, the weight of my words settling where excuses had lived. For the first time, I didn't soften my edges with an apology. The word no sat between us like a stone. No one could move. And in that sterile hospital room, among fractured bones and fractured loyalties, I felt something mend inside me. That night, when the house finally quieted, I placed the diploma on the mantel beside a photo of my children. Not for my family to admire, but for me to claim. The paper wasn't just proof of a degree, it was proof that my worth could not be RSVP'd away. I touched the frame, steady, and felt the difference settle in my bones. From now on, when someone tries to rename absence as planning or silence as peace, the room will not wait for me to defend myself. The walls themselves will answer first. I am here.